AI is all around us. It tells us what to watch, it evaluates our credit score, and it helps us get to where we're going. But can it really help us design our next quilt? And more importantly, are we ready to let it? Today's guest is Theresa Benson, also known as the AI Quilter. She recently published The Digital Muse, bringing AI into your creative process. It's both detailed and approachable, and she's going to tell us all about it. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Theresa Benson. Welcome, Theresa, to the podcast. Where in the bouts in the world are you coming to us from?
Yeah, I'm in Chicagoland. So I am about 40 minutes north of downtown Chicago in a town called Hawthorne Woods.
Okay, is that farther north than Napierville?
It is. It's slightly different. It is a little bit more east toward Lake Michigan and then a bit north. Yeah. There are going to be people who watch your podcast and listen to your podcast who are native Chicagoans, and they're going to know exactly where Naperville is. I should say, I'm a transplant. I've lived here for 12 years and still don't entirely know where every suburb is, but I know it is south and to the west of where Hawthorne Woods is. So, yeah.
Where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Iowa. I lived my entire childhood in Iowa. And then when I graduated university, I've now lived all over. I've lived in Texas, Oregon, California, Indiana, China briefly, Sweden briefly, Wisconsin, and then now I've been here for the last 12 years.
My father used to work for Maytag.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
he was down in Des Moines all the time. And
all the time.
We just grew up thinking like Iowa was the best, most beautiful place in the whole world.
I think about my childhood and like the values that I grew up with and that I try to espouse in how I teach and how I treat people, right? It really was a wonderful place back in the day. I had the opportunity to meet our state senator, Tom Harkin, back when I was a kid, and our governor when I was little. I wrote him a letter about wanting to sled at the golf course, and it had been like closed because too many kids had, sled right into water hazards in the wintertime. And the governor's office literally wrote me a letter back, and it fostered in me this idea of, participatory government and kindness and equity and inclusion and all of these beautiful, wonderful things that public office can be. I've taken those principles into how I teach, right? Like the governor's office didn't need to write a 6-year-old back, but they took the time to explain the why. And similarly, like when I approach audiences who are sitting there believing maybe they can't get whatever it is I'm about to teach them, or that are feeling awkward about asking a certain question, I try to approach it in a similar way of like, hey, you have every right to ask whatever question you need to in order to get this understanding. And I am going to treat you with, just as much respect as the next person.
You sound like you're an extrovert, which is unusual for a quilter. What do you do in your day job?
Yeah, so I would say I'm an extroverted introvert, honest to goodness. So what do I do in my day job? What don't I do? I run a management strategy and consulting firm. So I help small to medium businesses with everything from marketing strategy, messaging, rebranding, helping them get unstuck. I also am a product professional. So I help companies who have ideas of products that they want to sell, market, create. And I help them build out requirements documents, do competitive analysis, figure out what their specific value is to the world that they inhabit, and then help them bring their products to market, tell their story in the way that their market will hear the value of what they're trying to do. So I do that. Most recently, I was also vice president of marketing and vice president of product management for a firm out of Colorado, helping them do basically the same thing. So I started as an executive advisor and then moved into that role for the last couple of years. I also am building this brand, the AI Quilter. So I do a lot of education, working with libraries, quilt guilds. I wrote a book. I talk with publications about ethical use of AI. I talk to businesses about the ethical use of AI, what things to look out for, how to teach their employees. And then I have a podcast of my own called Hilarious, which is all about helping people feel less alone in the world if they grew up with trauma, whether it's something terrible happened to them, like an event, the death of someone close to them, or the more day-to-day abuses that some people experience in their childhood that they bring forward into adulthood. So a friend of mine and I started a podcast focused on helping people deal with that, trauma and find resource and hope through laughter, through interviews with psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, from comedians, yeah, so that's a bit of what I do in my day to day. Every day is slightly different.
Holy mackerel. Because I read your profile in your book. You went to school for electrical engineering. You're a
Yes.
quilter, and then there's AI on top of that. Talk about a multifaceted person. Let's try and just take them one at a time. When did you start as a quilter?
I started as a quilter in Portland, Oregon. So I had graduated university with a degree in electrical engineering, went to Texas for 10 months for a training program at the company I was working for. And then once I was done with the training program, I moved to Portland. That was where my assignment was. And I was there to be a technical salesperson. And I was at a customer, and he said to me, Theresa, you know what? Don't be like the kids who work for me. And I said, yes, sir. Okay. What do you mean? And he said, find yourself a hobby with a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you're successful in business, which I think you will be, he said, you will never feel the satisfaction of completing a project. You will very quickly niche into one of a few areas. Either you'll be great at kickoff and planning, and so you'll be brought into the start of all of these things. If you're more of a doer and a driver, you'll, focus on the middle bit of projects. And the people who end up tying up all the loose ends at the end of a project never have the satisfaction of the first two phases. He said, for the last 18 years, you've started from a place of having no knowledge, developing a mastery, then getting a gold star and a pat on the back. And he's like, you will never get that gold star again. It will never happen if you're successful at work. And I'm like, well, that's morbid and awful, and also incredible advice to get at 23 or 24. So I don't know if you know, but it rains a lot in the Pacific Northwest, especially in the wintertime. I had also been told that I needed to invest in some indoor hobbies. So a friend of mine named Ann Bather and she was my age. She was a quilter. I knew how to sew from a very early age, but I had never quilted. And so she taught me the basics of quilting. And she and I used to sit there, these two 23, 24-year-old girls, watching the first season of Survivor, and loved every moment of it. I made the worst first quilt. It was like 5-inch squares and none of them match up. I always show it when I give lectures because I think it's so important to let people know it's okay to suck at something new that you've never done before. It's really okay. And that's what got me quilting. Rain, a cranky customer, and a good friend.
So how quickly did you start making patterns for purchase? Like you started designing your own quilts?
There's patterns that I've designed, and then there's ones that design for purchase. The very first pattern that I designed for purchase was only last year. So 1998 until last year, roughly, is the delta. And in there was a lot of overworking and burnout and lack of time to quilt really passionately and whatnot. But last year, and my good friend Annette was my very first customer. I made a quilt called Hello Sweetie. And the reason why I made it is because I wanted to help people avoid all of the problems that I experienced when trying to make a first quilt inspired by AI. So I went through several different phases. The first, we had a sulky salesperson come to our guild here in the Northwest suburbs just before COVID and whatnot. And he had given a talk about applique. I took his class. It was amazing. I bought all of the interfacing, all of the everything that you could buy. I probably bought because I thought, oh, applique is where it's at. It's going to be amazing. And so my Princess Diana quilt, which was the very first AI generated image that I transformed into a quilt. It was actually a mashup of Princess Diana and David Bowie as Ziggy Stardust because, why not when you have, all of the world's capabilities at your fingertips with AI. So I then thought, well, what can I learn from all of this? Right? Like, again, don't be afraid to suck at something new. I've never done what I'm doing before. It's okay, but what can I learn? And what I learned is that for me, I don't use anything at all now. I use technology that is available to us as quilters. I did find that using a clear silicone baking mat, well, they're now applique mats, but a clear silicone mat plus light steam seam 2 and nothing else works like a dream. I can apply the layers of fabric, make sure they overlap, apply heat, and the fabric will stick to each other. They don't stick to the mat. And then at the last moment, when I'm ready to put it onto background, Bob's your uncle, it just peels right off and goes right on. And my cheeky quilt bee friends nickname that Commando applique, going commando. There's nothing in between. And so that's what I call what I do. And so I figured if I'm going to teach people how to make quilts with AI, I want to teach them step by step how to do what I do with Commando applique so that they don't run into the same issues. And so that's where my quilt patterns were born. It came out of this desire to help people skip a few of the painful spots and get to the fun part, the creating. So, yeah, it was only about a year and a half ago, I would say, that I made my very first pattern ever.
So, were you using AI for quilting right from the very beginning?
No. So, in the very beginning, I did all the traditional, patterns, everything except for triangles. For the longest time, I was a huge fan of Irish chain quilts because they made pretty designs, but it was all squares and I don't have to worry about bias and angles and everything else. And so I did that for years and years and years. I did the requisite t-shirt quilt that all of us have done at some point. And then I discovered foundation paper piecing and EQ8. And Cheryl Sloboda came to our guild and talked about a year where she made all of these mini quilts to teach herself, how to applique and how to bind and how to do all of these things. And between EQ8 and foundation paper piecing, I got over my fear of triangles. And then when my stepmom passed away, I had the opportunity. I made mini quilts out of her clothing for every one of her children and grandchildren. And I made a bigger quilt for my dad out of the fabric from her clothing, like his memory quilts. And that solidified a lot of skills for me that I hadn't been able to practice in the other types of quilts I was making. And that's when I started to experiment and try to make my own, patterns. And so that's why I said patterns for sale versus making my own patterns. I then got up the courage to try making my own foundation blocks, and I made a quilt that I bring to lectures. And I always ask people, can you guess the first letter that I designed a foundation block for? It's the word create. And you'll notice that one of the E's is backwards. That's, again, suck at something new and then learn it, master it, and keep on going. So AI has only been in my sphere of like creativeness probably for about 5 or 6 years, like as a creative outlet to inspire quilts, probably just the last 5 or 6 years. I've worked in the AI industry for about as long as well, but the two didn't really come together at the same time. One was, obviously a career choice. The other was by happenstance. I started thinking, oh my gosh, I can't draw a stick figure worth a darn. And now I can suddenly create whatever comes to mind. This is amazing. And then immediately after that was, how do I help other people do this? How do I get people to be less afraid of it? How do I get people to try? How do I get, like that's immediately where I went. And so the AI Quilter was born.
And when did you get the idea to write a book?
Gosh, probably about a year and a half ago.
How long did it take to write?
Not as long as you would think. I would say all in maybe 10 months. And that's partly because I couldn't work on it every day because I had a couple full-time jobs and, other things going on. But once I started, it just flowed. And I give a lot of credit to a young woman named Dell, who was a marketing assistant for me. She kept telling me because she'd watch videos that I would make, or she would help me with some of my social media in the beginning. And she kept on saying, you need to tell people, you need to write a book. You need to, like explain this stuff so more people can learn. And I'm really glad she did. And the reception of the book has been like it's moved me to tears at times. Like the emails I get from people who have, bought it, or people who attend a class and buy it there, and then they email me later and they're like, "Oh my, I love that I get to take this idea or this knowledge and people in their homes, in their private moments when they can fail and no one will see what they've done, that they've trusted me to sit next to them on that journey without any judgment, because books don't judge, without any, anything, and they can just try. That's a gift. I don't even know. It's one of the most profound experiences I've had as a human being, I think, writing that book.
Nice. Well, it's a beautiful book. It's well written, and you spend a lot of time in the beginning of the book talking about the history of AI and
Hmm.
how we've been using it without knowing for years.
Hmm.
Why did you feel
Hmm.
it was important to share that part of the story?
Right now, especially, AI is everywhere. It's the latest marketing buzzword. And I think with any new, like major new technology that emerges in society, anything, it can be incredibly polarizing. And I think we're seeing that. It cuts a little bit across generations, some of the polarization. And the AI that most of us hear about in the news is only one flavor of AI. And I think sometimes, I don't even know if it's sometimes, I know in my core that people fear what they don't understand, I think it's important to relate things back to stuff we know and stuff we're unafraid of that has become so matter of fact in our lives. I don't know how to describe it. Like, I felt it was important that people understand that it really is okay, that AI itself, the whole realm of technology described as artificial intelligence, is either neither good nor bad. Instead, it's how we wield it that makes the difference. And I think in doing that, and in helping people understand this long history and evolution of it, I hoped that for some people it might allay some of their concerns. I'm sure for some it maybe increased the alarm that, oh my gosh, AI has been around, for so much longer than I expected. And, how is my data being used? And yes, those are the exact right questions. But again, it's not the AI that you need to be worried about. It's how the people are using the AI to control the narrative, to market to you, that is the problem. Because AI is also used for immense good in detecting cancer earlier than the human eye, can detect it when looking at mammograms and biopsy results. AI is being used to develop cures for some cancers. Like there, AI is neither good nor bad. It's how we choose to use it that is ultimately what's important. And I thought in giving a history lesson that might kind of come across a little bit.
What type of reader were you aiming for when you wrote this book?
I originally started out thinking it was only going to be for quilters. And as I started going along, I realized that that's not who it's for at all. It is for the cautiously optimistic about technology. It's for the curious. It's for dreamers and poets and people like me who can't draw a stick figure to save their lives, but they have pictures and universes in their minds that they want to get out. It's for people who wanted to create and have heard about AI as a technology that might be able to help them create, and they don't know where to begin, and they're tired of sort of the tech bro culture, because there are a lot of young men on YouTube and Instagram talking about all the magical things you can do with AI. But as with a lot of things in life, sometimes their analogies and the drive behind their use of AI is incongruous with how a huge portion of the population might want to use AI. Like I want to use it to make a picture of Princess Diana as Ziggy Stardust. I want to create an image of the most adorable hedgehog you could imagine so that I can make a quilt out of it. I want to express what it was like to be me in Iowa playing school when everybody else played house. I want to recreate that image, but I can't draw worth a darn. I want to express a really complex concept in less words than I normally would. And so I figured if I was tired of some of those things, and if I wanted some of those things, to create and to be and to do, I probably am not alone. And so that's who I wrote the book for. I wrote the book for curious boomers who, want to try new things and who have an open mind to using technology in new ways. I wrote it for the Gen Xers who were raised on hose water and neglect with keys around our necks, right? um, who started out in an analog world and have made this transition to a digital world. And now we want to both help our parents and our kids use technology in an ethical and responsible manner. I wrote it for millennials who I admire so much for giving voice to the ethical concerns around AI and the environmental concerns around AI. I wrote it for, those younger folk who their parents see a creator in them and want to nurture that by giving them a roadmap. Here's little recipes in this book that you can try to make art. That's who I wrote it for.
So I just know from my own experience that the prompt and the structure of the prompt when you're talking to Chat GPT or any of the other AI programs is the key thing. What would be a good prompt for quilting?
Yeah, so I get this all the time. I asked AI to make a pattern, a quilt pattern, and it was terrible. And in fact, in the book, I show a quilt pattern that AI created for me, and the math doesn't math at all. So a good prompt. So first off, we need to think about the medium that we as quilters use. Ours, unless you're an art quilter that adds 3 dimensions to your quilts, ours is a flat 2D medium, right? We're making something that is, in essence, a flat piece of art. So including language in your prompt, and I'll speak one in just a moment, including language in your prompt to emphasize that what we're not going for is a photograph or photorealism. Instead, what we're going for is something that is flat and 2D. That's important. Then understanding art movements and understanding what appeals to you, because what's important to remember about using AI is this isn't about mimicry and stealing artists' work. That is not what this is about. This is about expressing what's in you in a way that moves you. And so, understanding the difference between cubism and fauvism and impressionism and abstract impressionism and pop art. So figuring out what movements inspire you, and then getting really clear about the subject of the thing that you want to make. So is it a standalone item? Is it a scene? Is it something simple? Is it something detailed? I started using a lot of people's names. Like in the background here, you can see that's Audrey Hepburn. I know it's a little bit blurred, but that's been in several quilt shows. I used to make a lot of images that were of real people. And over time, I've gotten away from that because I realized, like, hang on, these are human beings that have the right to their own images and their own history and their own whatever. And so I've moved into, more mythological things, or I've modified images of my own using AI. So a good prompt might be something like a young woman standing in a field at golden hour, holding a beach hat, flat illustration, 2D, abstract expressionism. And that for me captures a lot of the different components. So I talk about the subject, the setting, the lighting that I want. So golden hour is going to be evening or morning. It's going to have sort of a warmth to it. I made sure to include flat and 2D. And then I informed the style that I want. I want sort of an illustration style because I could do something like oil painting. However, trying to convey brush strokes in fabric can get really difficult to accomplish. You would need several different tints and shades of a particular color to really pull it off. So a flat illustration. And then I happen to like abstract expressionism as an art style. It has an energy to it that just really appeals to me. So it's almost like constructing a Mad Lib, if you remember Mad Libs from when we were
Yes.
kids, right? And in the book, I actually break down every one of those sort of components into pieces and then give people things to choose from until you get confident with your own language. You focus on the topic of the prompt, the subject that you're trying to capture, and then just follow the recipe for the rest. And you'll find pretty quickly those images that really speak to you. And then I always say, copy and paste those into a Word document and hold those close, because holy cow, those become gold when it's time to create your next, fabric masterpiece.
So are there other places or ways we can use AI in our quilting other than the design process?
Yes. Oh my goodness, yes. In fact, here's another way that I use AI in quilting. So you can use AI for color selection. So as an example, I made the quilt that you see at the center of your screen in EQ8. So I just picked colors that appealed to me in the EQ8 program. I didn't choose fabrics, I just used their solids. And then what you're looking at is Adobe Illustrator, and Adobe Illustrator has AI components in it. And one of the things that it has in it is the ability to modify colors using plain language. So I'm going to just bring this down here, and I've got this design selected. I'm going to come up and click this magic button, and then generative recolor. Generative means generate or create. It is creating something new that's never been seen before. And so each time that we make a request to an AI, a generative AI platform, it's actually creating on the spot something new. And so the cool thing about this is we can use plain language to inspire the mood or the color palette that we want to get across. So I'm going to put you on the spot, but what are some words that might define a color palette you really like? Is it a beach at sunset? Is it,
No,
a
I'm
red?
much more of a vintage
Okay.
textured look.
Okay. Keep going. You like what?
Vintage textured teal. Teal is one of my favorite colors, obviously. Teal and orange. No, let's do something different than what you've got already. So let's go with teal, lime green, and a fuchsia.
Okay, so instead of prescribing exactly all the colors we want the AI to pick, I'm going to pick teal and lime green. And why do you like those colors? Do they remind you of a time in your life, a scene? What about those colors really, captures it for you? Does it
Well,
make
I
it?
know when I put lime green on, I have a
Mhm.
big smile. Like for whatever
Yeah.
reasons, lime green just makes me happy. Um,
Okay.
Teal,
So
I like it because it's a complex color. Like it's not blue, it's not green, it's in between.
yes. Okay. So I've written vintage, teal, lime green, happiness, and joy. So I am going to now hit generate, and we're going to get 4 color suggestions that might work for the pattern that we're working with. So here's one, and it just comes from vintage. So you can see vintage gives us these muted colors. Teal, well, some of these, teal is a very complex color.
Mhm.
When is it teal? When is it blue green? When is it aqua, right? So it might be captured in here. This is, somewhat bright and happy. Here's another option. It pulled in a purple, and we've definitely got more of a lime green going on here. Here's one that captures the orange that we didn't put into the prompt, but it is there. And this honestly, I would probably make this quilt. This is gorgeous. But you can see that just by using plain language, I'm able to pull in all different kinds of color palettes. And so I show this in my classes that like here's a color palette inspired by the phrase school crayons, or here's salmon sushi, or disco nights, yellow submarine. You know, each one is just phrases that evoke something. And then Adobe Illustrator's AI understands value, you know, light to dark. It understands value. And so it applies those same values to the design we've asked it to recolor, and
Right.
it makes some remarkable results. You know, avocado toast.
I
Yeah,
love
like
avocado toast.
right? Isn't that lovely? So you get the avocado, you get the like little burnt crispy bits of a piece of wheat toast, right? Maybe there's some black sesame seeds sprinkled on the top. You can see sort of where this inspiration comes from. This is another salmon sushi. You can see the salmon meat itself. You can see the green of the seaweed in the roll, right?
Mhm.
So this is another way that we can use AI in our quilting to inspire our color choices.
So you've mentioned your guild a couple of times. When did you join a guild?
Yeah, I joined the Northwest Suburban Quilters Guild back in 2019. Well, when I was living in Indianapolis, I was invited to join a guild there, but I always thought it was for really, really, really good quilters. And I wasn't a
Beginner
really, really,
mistake that a
really
lot of people make. They
right.
they
Exactly.
think the guild is only like you've almost got to apply to get in and audition to
Yeah.
get in, where it's not that at all.
Yes, exactly. And so I wonder sometimes how my quilt journey would be different had I joined back when I was living in Indianapolis, you know, because joining in 2019, then I've learned so much more about how to bind a quilt, how to, you know, like how to let go of certain expectations I had for some of the quilt blocks that I've tried over the years. I've made incredible friends. The program people at my guild are the ones who encouraged me to actually do my very first lecture. They had seen what I was doing for myself with my Princess Diana quilt, my Audrey quilt. I did a quilt of Kamala Harris, and they said, you know, your topic and what you do is so different than any of the other people that we bring into our guild. You should really consider presenting. And so they took a chance on me, and I did exactly that. I gave a talk, and then I taught a class. For anybody who's younger and who is uncertain if they want to belong to a quilt guild, I cannot stress enough how much good there is in belonging to a quilt guild. There is so much good and beauty and kindness and creativity and acceptance. The earlier you can get into being a part of a guild as part of your quilt journey, the better, honestly.
Yeah, I've found them very inspiring.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I hate to say it, but sometimes we're really judgy about what a person looks like, and then they create something that just wows you.
Well, the average age of students in my AI class is probably 70. I mean, the assumptions made of quilters is so wrong. The fact that there's a huge population of young, Gen Z and millennial quilters out there paving entirely new roads for what quilting actually is, and then you've got older quilters who embrace and are curious about and unafraid of trying something wildly new like artificial intelligence. It's so inspiring to me. I just taught a class last week, and one of the women in class, I would have pegged her as maybe 10 years older than me. So awesome. It was so amazing. And she is so wildly creative with what she was doing. And then she just mentioned in passing she was 80. My jaw dropped. And it shouldn't by now. I mean, honestly, the average age of the majority of people who attend my AI lectures and my AI classes, definitely skews older. The future of quilting is incredibly bright on
Yeah.
both ends.
Can you tell me about your beautiful Audrey quilt behind you?
My Audrey quilt. So when I started working with generative AI, image-based AI, I had this notion of creating quilts of all of these different women that I admire and aspire to. Yeah. And so I had done Princess Diana and I really liked that. And I decided to try Audrey Hepburn next. And I struggled with what would actually capture what I loved about her. She was such a unique and kind and just a remarkable woman. And I kept on trying different prompts to try and capture what I wanted. And I finally landed on this image. When you see it from a distance, she has these huge earrings that seem to sort of sparkle. The secret to those earrings is when you get up close, you'll see that they're made up of paw print material and house flies. For some reason, I had a fat quarter, black and white fat quarter of house flies. I must have gotten it like in a bundle of black and white fabrics at some point. I'm a fat quarter stasher versus a yard buyer. I tend to just grab fat quarters wherever I'm living or wherever I'm traveling. And so I had so much fun pulling all of these fabrics together. I know you have a ton of Stash Buster quilts on your website, and I love that. I am a huge fan of using what you have and creating with what you have, both from an environmental standpoint, like reuse, repurpose, share, versus a lot of overconsumption. And I had seen a lot of artwork, fabric artwork being done by people who used solid fabrics. And so I just got it in my craw that I needed to be able to make these portrait quilts using prints from my stash exclusively, nothing else. And so Audrey was a labor of love. It's all machine quilted on a domestic machine. I now have a sit down machine that I use, like a sit down long arm, but the thread kept breaking. I had some medical stuff come up halfway through making it. I took it apart and put it back together a couple times to get it just so, because I really admire her as a person and I wanted this to be just perfect. I looked around until I found the perfect Tiffany blue fabric to use for the back of the quilt, to pay homage to Breakfast at Tiffany's. And yeah, I'm so proud of how it turned out. And that quilt and my Diana quilts are two quilts where I felt sort of for the first time that I was proud of the outcome, regardless of the judgments of others. Like as you mentioned earlier, we can be very judgy. And quilting, we're all terribly afraid of the quilt police. We all are. And yet we all know that there are no quilt police, but there are in our minds. And for whatever reason, the noise is gone when I look at Audrey and when I look at Diana. I just feel proud that this idea I had in my head, I was able to get out and into fabric and I could express something deep inside me in fabric. I've got, God, probably 30 more quilts like these that I want to make, and I will at some point. But at the moment, my focus is on teaching and helping other people, find their digital muse and using AI to inform, fabric choices and quilt plans.
So, if people want to get a hold of you, find out more about your lectures or your workshops or your patterns, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's theaiquilter.com. So the is very important, theaiquilter.com. I'm on Instagram at the AI Quilter. I have a YouTube channel at the AI Quilter. I'm on Facebook. And you can send me an email at hello@theaiquilter.com. Those are all the best ways to get in touch with me. I have a classes section on my website. I have a calendar of, upcoming classes and lectures I'm giving. If people are local, I am looking into creating some on-demand classes that people could take, but that's something that would be toward the end of this year, beginning of next. So, and if you're going to QuiltCon 2026, I'll be giving a lecture there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. You've been a wonderful guest and lots of information.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here. I feel like I am standing in a room full of giants being on your podcast, and I appreciate you opening the door to this entirely wild new topic of technology in traditional arts like quilting. So thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Theresa Benson. I'm quite intrigued by it all, and I'm looking forward to trying out some of her exercises in the book. Theresa has a lot on offer. If you want to visit her website and take a look at her patterns, her classes, or her lectures, or maybe get a copy of the book, I will leave all her links in the video notes below. Next time you're in your sewing room, have Karen's Quilt Circle playing on in the background. I have interviewed so many amazing and interesting people on this show. Let one inspire you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.